Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Liston, and I am the Chief Strategist and Joyful Militant at Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. This webinar is an opportunity for you to learn a little bit about our approach to evaluation work. The title of this webinar is The Anti-Blackness is Exhausting, but Another Word is Possible Approach to Evaluation. We dedicate our work at this moment in loving memory of Audre Lorde, Octavia Butler, Harriet Tubman, and Fannie Lou Hamer. The name of our organization is Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. We are a professional learning organization run by Black women. We strategize with individuals, organizations, and communities using facilitation, research, evaluation, and coaching. This is the third year that we have been doing this practice, and we have been steadily growing. Everybody within the organization has different levels of expertise in different things, but we do have a shared commitment about thinking about equity, justice, and liberation, particularly as it relates to Black communities. So when we enter in the conversation about anti-Blackness is exhausting, we are acknowledging that racial injustice and inequity exists. It's a part of our everyday life. It's a part of the way that we are experiencing the world. But we are not going to say that it determines whether or not our future can be different. We sincerely believe that we can help make the world different, and not just different, but better, especially as it pertains to racial justice and equity. So we take the time to think about anti-Blackness is real. How do we think of questions of inequity, injustice, indignity that have happened to Black people, Black communities, Black families, and Black bodies? And what does that mean for the research questions we develop, the processes and tools and methods that we use, the way we look at answers and analyze our data, the way we present them, and the way we reflect on our own processes through the exercise. As you can see, we are active on social media. So if throughout this webinar or presentation, you would like to send a tweet, Instagram, a Facebook note, we encourage you to do so. Our team is very active and responsive, and we would love to know if you're getting anything out of this webinar. Even if you're just sharing with us that you're watching it, we'll be more than happy to shout you out as someone who is a part of our family. Like I said, we are a professional learning community run by Black women using liberation and beloved community frameworks to evaluate, facilitate, and strategize with individuals, organizations, and communities. In that work, we have realized that we are doing anti-oppression work, and we are working through how systems of oppression have impacted our lives. We also know what responsibilities that we have within doing that, undoing or practicing harm reduction in that sense. We also know where we have been harmed and where we are in a position of healing. One of the things that we have noted as an organization is that we really need to be conscious of what does it mean for us to be ableist. And so we are working diligently that every time we present or facilitate, that we are addressing how some of our unconscious ableism appears. So at the bottom of this slide, and I can move my face in case you can't see it, the bottom of that slide, you see in red text, if there's any way we can accommodate your learning during our session, feel free to text 414-563-7907. Knowing that you might not be watching this in real time, you can still text that number if there's any way about this presentation could be done differently to help promote your learning in a different way. What we've noticed in some of our facilitations is that it's been helpful for people to address whether or not they could hear or see, participate, or, which is often the case, if our language needs to be checked around promoting ableist ideas. For example, at one time, we held a session post-evaluation about dealing with results, and we entitled it Walk It Like You Talk It. And we were called out by members of the organization that was ableist for us to say, that walk it like you talk it. Even though our intention was this metaphor of like, do what you say, but we were upholding a very ableist idea of the world. And so being called out on that was a part of our learning process. So we do ask that as we engage in this harm reduction, anti-oppression work, that the accommodations that need to be made around what it means for you to learn in this space, how do we affirm identities, and how do we address the ways people who've been historically marginalized more effectively within this webinar, let us know. We would love to do that, including if anyone would like to dub this in another language. We would be totally open for that. So we always begin very conscious of who we are and what we bring into the space. And so at this point in the webinar, I just would like you to take a pause for you to speak a little bit about your origin story. If you don't know, in the bottom corner, I'm a nerd, and I founded the organization, so Nerd Life is all about this. There is a strip from Spider-Man. A spider just bit me, and I don't know why is my hand burning like this. This is how Peter Parker turned into Spider-Man. And often inside of our organization, we think about, people doing liberation and social justice work as being superheroes, because we're trying to imagine a world that doesn't exist, and we're fighting and also building at the same time. So you have to be a superhero in order to do that. But we also recognize the superpowers that each of us has are different, and they come from different things. I know some of you all might have heard of Black Girl Magic, and it would be great if you read some of the awesome blog posts written about Black Girl Magic. There's even some psychological articles about theorizing Black Girl Magic as a psychological construct. But even though we know that we're powered by Black Girl Magic, we also think about the origin stories that each of us has as individuals, and what does that mean for us coming into this space, and how can we hold them? So we ask each other our origin stories. We spend a lot of time getting to understand where people come from, what's their story, why do they feel the way that they do about certain things. And so at this moment, I just want you to take a few minutes, maybe no more than 5, for you to write down the key points of your origin story. When it comes to you being in this moment, watching this webinar, what led you here? What allowed you to think about things in this particular way that allowed this webinar to be relevant to you? What's your origin story? Pause here and write those bullet points down. Welcome back. I hope that you had a really engaging and reflective moment thinking about your origin story. I just want to add a little bit about the origin story and how it also relates to our evaluation work. This quote is one that's often quoted by Angela Davis, but not always given its context. If we are not afraid to adopt a revolutionary stance, if indeed we wish to be radical in our quest for change, then we must get to the root of our oppression. After all, radically simply means grasping things at the root. Angela Davis, Radical Perspectives on Empowerment for African American Women, Harvard Educational Review, August 1988. In this quote, Angela Davis is challenging us to think about systemic oppression as having root causes, thinking about what we're experiencing each day as being branches and fruit of some core root causes. We might refer to them as isms. We have sexism, heterosexism, racism, classism, militarism, that create systems of oppression, and that's the fruit and branches that all of us exist within. But we also, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the future, think about the world fractally. And if there's a system of oppression that serves as a seed, and it bears all of this fruit that might impact me as a Black woman or someone else who is poor and disabled, or any myriad of intersectional oppressions that people experience, then we also have to understand that there's roots to resilience. And so when we think about our individual capacity to know where we come from and why we're doing a thing, we're trying to understand our roots. And as our roots of resilience intertwine with the roots of our oppression, how do we come to understand what resilience is, and how do we not tie our resilience up into our system of oppression? So we take a look at who we are and how we're showing up as a tool for thinking about the organizations we work with, the goals and processes we're about to engage in, for us to think what's fruit, what's trees, what's branches, and what's root there. And are we getting to the root, or are we getting caught up in the fruit and the branches? So sincerely, as evaluators, this is self-reflection at work. When we're thinking about how we show up, how systems of oppression have impacted our own individual lives, how we become resilient, and what does that mean for the organizations and communities that they work with, where they're often engaging a problem or an issue. There's also things that are assets, right? Resilience that are built up into that. So in thinking about this, now that you are aware of your origin story, I would love for you to take a moment and reflect about change. As evaluators, we often enter in conversations when change is about to occur or is occurring or just occurred. Change roots a lot of the work that we do. An evaluation is usually asked for because we need to think about our funding. We need to make some changes to the program. We want to know if we need to expand. Like, change is either on the horizon, or in other cases, new leadership. So now I want an evaluation, or new funder, and now I want an evaluation. So change is either happening, or on the horizon. And so we realize that everyone responds to change differently. And the responses we have to change aren't about whether or not someone wants change to happen or they don't want to have it to happen. It's about our ability to understand what change means for us. For example, if you can't tell, I'm a very type A personality. When it comes to change, I'm definitely a person who be like, throw everything out, start anew, build everything from scratch. We can do it again. I am quick to start over. Erasing everything means nothing to me. I'm one of those people, like, the document got erased, and be like, great, now I can really say what I really feel. Like, it's all opportunity, right? To do something new, and we can scrap everything, and that's fair. Other people with change are like, whoa, before the change occurs, let me understand what parts of this we should be keeping and what parts should we be letting go. And that's fair. And then other people are like, I need to talk to a lot of people. I need to get a lot of feedback, a lot of responses for me to understand how everyone that this change will impact, how they're going to feel about it before I can understand how I'm going to feel about it. Now, often those three people, and those aren't the only types, but those three people are in tension with one another because they feel like they want change, and because the other people don't believe in change the way they do, they don't want change. I say it's time to get rid of everything. You're saying we need to ask a bunch of people. You must want to get in the way of change. But the thing is, that's not true. All three of those people want change. It's just that each of those individuals are thinking about change processes differently. And our work as evaluators is definitely to be cognizant and mindful of like how people are going to take, interpret, and deal with change. And that can be informative in terms of how evaluation findings will be used in an organization. If you're talking about an organization that when change occurs, it feels like it's a threat to everything that they know, that means evaluation findings will be seen as threats, right? Even though, coming from a data science perspective, we're just like, we're reading the data. However, if you're in another organization where change is looked at as something that's demanded and has to happen right now, people are looking at evaluation results as catalysts. And that could be good or bad. They're like catalyst to this, catalyst to that. And so thinking about how people, individuals as a part of organizations respond to change is a large part of our work. So I want you to take a few moments and respond to this question. When change happens, what is your initial, like, boom, immediate response? When change happens, what is your initial response? Take 5 minutes to jot that response down. If you are in a room with other people, I would think it would be a good time for you to collaborate. So write a couple notes and then spend a few minutes in discussion about when change happens. If you happen to be in an organization where you all know each other really well, I would definitely take a moment to reflect and then ask others if this is what they see within you. Because if that's true, that can show you a lot. If it's not, that can also show you a lot. So use this opportunity to think about when change happens. What is your initial response? Now that we have taken some time to think about what change is and what our responses to change are, I want to talk a little bit about a relationship between some of the things that we do once we understand a little bit about change. There are 5 key things that we're always sort of working through and with. These things are not discrete. They are coming out at all different times within our project, but this is where things kind of fall for us. And so I just want to share this. The first thing is principles. Principles are like, what are the values that guide our organization? And I've shared some of those with you. Like, we are an organization run by Black women. Like, that's a value. Black women's leadership, protecting it, follow Black women, trust Black women. That's all a part of what it means to be working at Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. There is a need for us to think about the world as something that's possible and attainable. Another world is possible. We can imagine things being different and then work to making our dreams come true. Another thing that I mentioned here is Black radicalism, as in we're thinking about the root of what Blackness is and how it informs our perspectives. And to get to a radical thing here, thinking about humanity and understanding the core essence of what does it mean to be human, and putting that on the fulcrum of the oppression of Black people. What does it mean to understand the world in that way, right? In a world that treats most Black people as subhuman or less than human, if I make Blackness the pinnacle of humanness, how do we shift dynamics like this to make everybody seem a little bit more human through the process? That's another webinar, but feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk about it. Below principles, after we talked about values, we have frameworks. And there's a number of frameworks that we use. The most common ones are beloved community, dignity, intersectionality, and collaboration. I'll talk about those in the upcoming slide, but those frameworks inform so much what we do, even how we deal with one another inside of the organization. Right now, I'm in the office, and thinking about what does it mean to collaborate with folks is ongoing conversation that we have internally. So we don't just have these recommendations and thoughts and give them in our evaluation feedback. We think about what does it mean for us, and if it's real for us or not real for us, how do we make that conversation tangible and meaningful for the people that we're working with. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about those frameworks in a moment. Practices. Practices of an organization are the recognized patterns of occurrence. Some people would put or prioritize policies here, but we argue that in an anti-oppression framework, the policy often serves to mask what the actual culture of the organization is. And so we think about practices or the recognized patterns of an organization. For example, any organization has an HR policy of what it looks like to hire and fire folks. What does it mean to correct people, provide feedback, things like that. But a practice, a recognized pattern that we have found in some organizations is that they have a recognized pattern of hiring young Black people who only stay for 6 months. The recognized pattern for some people would internalize that as, oh, Black people don't know how to do this work or don't know how to stay at this organization. In our evaluation framework, the questions that we would ask is what's happening at the organization that allows this pattern to continue, that you're bringing on young Black people and that they're not staying. So recognize patterns of work. Policies don't get to that. And in a lot of ways, people's reflections don't get to that. We got to get to the patterns of things that are happening, often not written down, not tangible, and only come about by asking some very critical questions. Excuse me. Activities. We think about the design, enactment, context, and outcomes of activities. These are the activities that any organization, everything from what does it mean for them to host a program or event? What does it mean for them to, again, this is where your hire and fire as an activity would come in. How is that process designed? What does it mean to actually do it? What's the context that shapes those activities happening and what outcomes come from it? Definitely a large part of evaluation on the program and process side. But for us, thinking about evaluating, thinking about equity and justice and liberation, principles, frameworks, and practices also matter, not just activities. And then lastly, tasks. What does it mean to complete the tasks? The meeting, the event, the report, the hire, the fire. what does that mean for the organizations that we work with? How is that task completed? So we're looking at principles, frameworks, practices, activities, and tasks for organizations all the time, and the interplay between those. How do the tasks reflect the frameworks that you use? How do the principles inform the activities that are done? Those are questions that we ask continuously, no matter what we're evaluating, to inform it in an equitable manner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our frameworks. Our first one is Beloved Community, which is largely informed by the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Bell Hooks. There are a lot of scholars, and in fact, one of our team members basically has a PhD in Beloved Community, can talk extensively about what this ideal is. The Beloved Community isn't a place, it's not achievable, and a lot of things, it's not even possible, but we hold it up as like, how do we work toward living in this space, operating in this space? And so there's some organizations that we work with where we spend a whole session just digging into what Beloved Community is. We are currently piloting an organizational assessment tool around the capacity for your organization to hold the practice of Beloved Community. Dignity, which is the framework that informs my dissertation research. It's the intellectual tradition of Black radical thought, thinking about the audacity of Black people to actually say, I should be dignified. And dignified is that the sense of me seeing myself as worthy amongst the people who I identify as a part of my community. I'm worthy because they are worthy because I am worthy, and there's no separation in that. It's inherent, it's because we exist, and it's continuously affirmed through the way that we socialize with one another. Next is Emergent Strategy, book recommendation. If you haven't read Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, drop everything and do it. Okay, don't drop everything, but do it really soon. And it is an opportunity for us to consider ways of practicing complexity. As you get to know an evaluation work, that it doesn't matter the plan or design you put together, it rarely is that straightforward. What actually happens is a series of hiccups and challenges that as researchers, we definitely have to articulate in a very thorough methodological section. But as emergent strategists, it's also for us an opportunity for us to think about in what ways can we challenge ourselves to think differently about the processes that we're engaging as representative of the world and not in conflict with it, right? So how can we see the patterns of how human behavior is working, and what ways can we use those patterns of human behavior to think about new ways to inform a more liberated, a more justice-based, and more equitable space for folks. And this isn't by least at any means, but intersectionality informed by the work of Kimberly Crenshaw. If you haven't read her work, of course, invest in it. I always recommend a TED Talk of hers called The Urgency of Intersectionality, where she explains or details how she popularized the concept. But for us, it's thinking about the multiple intersections of oppression that people are experiencing at all times. And what does it mean for us to be cognizant of them as they impact us in a self-awareness space, and how other people are working through that too, as they engage, learn about, understand different ways oppression is impacting their lives. Again, thinking about the origin story, right? What are the intersections of people's origin stories between, it could be everything from classism to colorism to heterosexism or militarism. It's all of these things that people are impacted by in particular that define who they are, their origin, their reason for being. So these are the frameworks that inform our work as entering the evaluation space, thinking about equity, justice, and liberation. And to be clear, this is different than a corporate diversity and inclusion practice. We are, again, looking at root causes of systems and thinking about another world being possible, which is a key difference between your traditional diversity and inclusion space and our justice, equity, and liberation space. Here's an opportunity for us to do another bit of reflecting. In what roles are you most comfortable? So thinking about what you do in the world, it could be anything from a professional personal, hobby, anything, what roles do you generally take in those spaces? And if you could take a moment to identify some of those roles, again, if you're by yourself, just note these down in a notebook. If you're with a partner, it'd be great to talk through and just play back and forth about what roles you're most comfortable with. And if you're working with others in the organization, again, this will be a great time to talk about this is what you see in yourself and ask others if they see the same thing. In what roles are you most comfortable? Now that we've had some time to think about the roles in which we're comfortable, I want to bring up, and I already mentioned emergent strategy, but I want to bring up a practice that really is informed by emergent strategy. And that means that everything is fractal, meaning that if it's happening here, that same pattern just gets repeated, repeated, repeated out in the world. And if we're not conscious, again, root, radical, how it starts, then we're missing sort of the things that we need to be conscious of to actually change or impact the system. Adrienne Marie Brown states, what we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. So thinking about the roles that you feel most comfortable in, this is challenging you to think about why you feel most comfortable in those roles. Are you routinely protecting a certain practice or value of yours? Are you in a position to challenge how you think about certain things? Do you step into conflict? Do you embrace it or do you avoid it? Are you taking leadership or are you receptive to others' leadership? Just what sort of things become fractal and representative to how you show up in the world? And again, remember, we're thinking about individuals as a part of organizations. And so some of the things that a leader practice just sort of replicates itself throughout the system, and no one has taken the time to figure out where that pattern began. And so people are trying to address the pattern, isolated incidents outside of where it began, and it becomes frustrating because they're like, well, this problem just happened again. It's because we never actually looked at the system. In the example I gave earlier about an organization who was hiring young Black folks who all leave within 6 months, to look at it fractally, it says like, what ways is the organization unable to hold them? And inherently, is this organization not built to hold young Black genius? And if that's the truth, how do we change the organization so that we can hold these young Black people? However, if you didn't look at these fractally, you'll say, we recruited this up and coming development officer in the foundation world that came into our organization, and they were here and they left after 6 months because the job was too challenging. Someone else left because their partner found a new job, so they left. Someone else left because they were making the conscious decision to go back to school. Someone else left because they got another opportunity, and someone else left because they had a conflict with somebody that was unresolvable. These become isolated incidents on a presumed assumption on the organization. And if the organization is able to hold Black genius, one, we have to argue that some of these things would not have occurred, but also that some of these things would have occurred differently. You would have a different relationship to them, i.e. the person who left for another job opportunity, would they have actually considered another job opportunity? The person who left for school, would they have saw this as a better option for them instead of school? The person who left because of a partner, would they have tried to consider or make a different arrangement for what it meant for them to continue working in this space? Like, all of these things become changed once we look at it fractally. What we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. And so in an equitable evaluation practice, we have to always think about what are the roots of it and how those roots replicated for better or for worse within an organization. Dignity as practice. One of the things of our framework was dignity, and there are 4 things that we definitely focus on: complex self-awareness, redistributing power, practicing radical empathy, and committing to relationships. That is a way for our organization to think about maintaining, respecting, protecting, and fulfilling a sense of dignity for everyone, practicing these 4 items. And again, we think about it even in the questions I posed today. The origin story is a reflection of who I am and how I'm showing up. redistributing power about who's able to understand the way oppression is hitting them and their responses to it, being able to understand others by hearing their stories or understanding these concepts of intersectionality, beloved community, and then being committed to the relationships that are needed in order for an organization or community to flourish. Some of the challenges that we engage in or encounter is one, competing commitments. When we're talking about changing an organization or understanding equity, some of us have competing commitments, and being able to articulate those is often difficult because we say the right words and don't understand that the meaning behind them is different. For example, organizations said they're trying to become more equitable because that's the buzzword, when they really mean we want to check off all the boxes for a corporatized diversity and inclusion, so no one can say that we're not diverse, right? And it's two different things to step into the field of justice and equity and liberation, or just be represented as a diverse and inclusive space. Some competing commitments. Some people might be talking about equity and saying that we want to challenge some of the people who hold the power in this organization to redistribute their power. And other people are saying we need everyone to be paid equally. And those are different things, right? So competing commitments. Fear, people just afraid for things for changing, right? They're just afraid if things are different, what does that mean for them? And I'm used to what I'm always doing, so why should I be prepared to do anything else? Perfect versus perfect is really perfect versus perfect, and how, we're often saying things but not understanding the difference. Perfect, perfect mean two totally different things, but based on those texts, they're exactly the same. So how do we get into sort of those deep down differences in the conversation that we might not notice? And lastly, just lacking self-awareness, willingly being unconscious of the power and privilege individuals have in a space and not trying to seek out ways to become more aware of them or to change them. Our final question is, what other ways do you desire to learn more about yourself? Thinking about how you show up in the world and thinking about what does it mean for you to exist and to do the work that you're doing. How can you? What do you want to do so that you can learn more about yourself? I would jot some of those things down, and if you have the opportunity to talk about them with someone else, do so. So your approach to evaluation, basically from what we're saying, is a reflection of the 4 questions I asked you. Your position, your capacity to respond radically, so focusing on those root things, understanding the role of self-preservation. How do you maintain yourself within these systems, and in what ways can you be pushed out of your comfort zone? And lastly, what additional ways can you consider more possibilities for learning about yourself? And fractally, how can that be used to learn more about an issue, organization, or other aspect of work that you care about? So these are the 4 things that inform your evaluation approach. So talking about Ubuntu and what we do, you've actually informed who you are and what you do and what you would be mindful of if you were to carry out an equitable evaluation. Lastly, again, please reach out to us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can also reach out to me personally on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at a Black woman PhD. But I also want to make sure that you have a couple of book recommendations. It wouldn't be information unless there were some books for you to go to. Number 1, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. 2, Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. 3, Foundations of Empowerment Evaluation by David Fetterman, and All About Love by Bell Hooks. I encourage you to dig into some of these books. They are outside, except for the evaluation one, outside of evaluation, but carry a lot of the principles that inform what it means to do equitable, focused evaluation, that gets into some of the buzzwords of being culturally responsive, being self-aware, being grounded, being in a space where you're thinking about what does it mean for an organization, group of organizations, network, or whomever, to really create more opportunity for equity to exist. What does that mean? And how does this program play into that? So that's the work that we do. Thank you so much for watching this quick webinar. I hope you learned something. We love to hear feedback. So please feel free to connect with us on social media so we can get to learn a little bit more about you and to ask us really critical questions. Thank you so much and have a great day.